Would you guys want to check to make sure that one's on? Oh, you turned it on? Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to the June 6th meeting for Stone Ridge. Gentlemen, we're going to have a brief housekeeping issue here. Let's take a look at the April 18th minutes, and this would be on the Stone Ridge. And I believe, Bobby, you have to abstain from voting on this one. Otherwise, if it's as according to your review, I have reviewed it. If so, I'll take a motion.
Yeah, I reviewed it, and I make a motion that we accept it.
Okay, I'm going to do this in two parts because we have a motion on the 7:31 hearing. I'll move. Second by Charlie. All those in favor? Opposed? That's unanimous. And then we also had, no, I think that was the one. We had some comments. I'm sorry, I thought there was an additional hearing that night. There isn't. Okay, so that one's okay.
I'm sorry. We didn't, I don't know, did we get a copy of those minutes?
April 18th. These are the board's minutes. That's why we're approving them as they were written to us.
I see. And we don't.
We can give you a copy.
Okay. We don't look at them before they go into the. Oh, okay.
No, it's internal. It's internal with us.
Got it. Thank you.
It's the
Just wanted to
minutes of
check.
ours.
Some towns do it differently, but I just wanted to check.
Yes, we'll certainly be happy to give you a copy. So I'll sign these as they were submitted. And then also we have the May 16th meeting. I have a motion on that one. Motion by John. Have a second?
I'll second it.
Not in attendance was Robert Capizzulo, John Mastriani, and David Pine, just to make sure that that's clear. All those in favor? Abstention, of course, Bobby Cap can't vote on it. He wasn't here. With that, approval? Aye? 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 In favor. Thank you, Mark. Okay. Why don't we move on to the next portion of the meeting? Don't forget, you've got to sign them. Okay, this will be on the continuation with Stone Ridge. Tonight we'll be discussing probably a few items outside the water and sewer, but why don't we turn it over to the applicant and you can kind of get us updated on water and sewer and what's been happening over since our last meeting. That would be great.
Thank you. Israel Lopez for the record with the Gutierrez Company. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Peter Glick with SMMA, our civil engineer, to give the update on sewer.
Thank you, Israel. mentioned, my name is Peter Glick. I'm a civil engineer with Sims Manny McKee Associates, 1000 Mass Ave, Cambridge. And we just an update in the sewer, and other folks will update on the water and the other items. But on the sewer,
Peter, if you could talk a little bit closer, just so that
sure, that's a little better.
the major audience can hear. Thank you.
Okay, we met with the sewer director earlier this week, and we clearly understand the town's concerns on the sewer to provide some additional storage in the wet well of the pump station there, because of the sensitivity of where the pump station is in particular, and also that it's become a town policy to do such. And we are looking at that, and we had a good meeting with the sewer superintendent, and we think we understand a solution to provide some additional storage. We're working on those solutions right now. So as you folks probably know, it's under construction right now, and it's pretty much built. So we're looking for where we can put some additional storage and be able to interface it with the existing system and the existing utilities that are in the street to be able to find a spot for that.
Why don't you, if you could, Peter, talk to the board about what the sewer department was looking for.
Sure.
Versus what your application is intending to do, just so that the board has updated on what those differences are or what you oppose or agree to.
And we did submit a package that included a narrative on those items there. But to explain to the board, right now the pump station that's in place is designed for a certain flow of about 46,000 gallons per day, and the proposal that in front of you, at total build out, I believe it's just under 80,000 gallons per day. And so the intention is, well, what do you do under the full build out to make this work? And we looked at the pump station itself and how could you modify that pump station to work? And one of the things that you can do is very simply switching out the pumps in the pump station and putting larger pumps in. But and use the same wet well. The wet well is a separate piece in there that stores all the volume of waste coming down from the facility. So what the town's concern is that we provide some extra storage so that in an emergency situation, the way the pump stations are set up is that they have 2 pumps in there. Each pump is designed so that it can handle the full peak flow, the full amount of flow that you would see in any occasion coming down that lane. Each one of those pumps can pump that full flow. So that's the first thing that you have in there. And the second part that you have is you have a little bit of storage in the tank itself, so that volume of waste that comes down there can be stored in that tank and it can be pumped out. And if the pumps fail themselves from let's say that there was an electricity issue and the electricity went out to the station, there's an automatic transfer switch and an emergency generator that'll automatically turn on, and that will keep those pumps working in the event that there's a power outage. And that's something that's required as part of the state requirements and the local requirements for doing the station. What the town was looking for is some additional storage that is above what is required by the guidelines that we typically use, but understandably so because of the sensitivity of where the pump station is. Town's looking for some additional storage. So in the case that there is a power outage, or if the pumps fail themselves, both pumps fail, or if there's a downstream problem, that you would have some additional storage that would provide the ability for a septic hauler or an outside pumping facility to come out and to be able to pump out that station. The time that it would take them to get there, to put a pump in and pump out that tank right there. And so that was the additional storage that we're looking at and we're going to provide for this system. And we intend on meeting with sewer director prior to the next meeting and coming up with a solution so that at the next hearing we'll have an agreed upon solution with I hope that answers the questions.
Yeah, and the reason I wanted you to explain that, because I was actually part of that work session, and it was an aspect of being proactive instead of reactive, especially if you're at a point of build-out where this pump station is right next to the high traffic of the exit format, the bike trail, and all that traffic that's going to be coming and going on a daily basis, including trying to get over that bridge. So I understand the aspect of what the sewer department is looking to do and be proactive, but it's also a practice that they've been doing for a number of years on many projects. So it's not something out of the ordinary for the Milford Sewer Board, whether it's this project or any other project. It's just that's their form of business. So I'm going to turn over to board members on this if they have any questions concerning it.
Yeah. The only question I have, I guess that the office space had looked at your previous approval for this project was figured at about 46,000 roughly gallons per day, and they believe that the total revised flow is going to jump up to about 83,000 gallons per minute. And now, what is the spec for that? You said that usually you design it to a particular spec. I would assume, is that the DEP spec, or is it, what percentage?
Yeah, the amount of flow that you estimate from a facility whether it's a residential facility or whether it's a institutional or,
Right.
or a commercial or office building. DEP does have standards in Title V that has those amounts. Typically, towns use that. There's also these same estimates are included in other documents that you'll find. There's a particular guidelines that DEP uses for the review of the sewer connection permits at the time when they were doing sewer connection permits. Now that they've delegated a lot of that to the towns to do, the towns have, generally most of the towns that I've ever seen always adopt the Title V flows. Some towns have their own Board of Health or sewer regs that have something very similar. But in this case, we would use the Title V flows.
Like the chairman said, actually, it's good to be proactive in these situations. So what you're telling us, I guess, is you're in the midst of building this pumping station, and it's built, but you got to retrofit it.
Excuse me?
You're going to have to retrofit it to add this additional water storage capacity. Or storage.
That's absolutely correct. We're going to add a separate tank, and when we find the correct location for it that works best, and that'll have a connection, a pipe connection to this new station that's almost complete now.
And you believe that's possible with no problems, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we believe that's something we can do. It's a gravity connection, and it doesn't. This tank doesn't have to be immediately 2 feet away from this stage. We can find a spot where we can put it in the ground. It'll likely go in the street, so we're going to have to cut out the street and put the tank in there, but that's where it will likely go.
Okay, very good. Any other members?
I think Mr. Chairman answered this question, but I just want to make sure. You keep saying the sensitivity of the location. Can you expand on that?
Sure. I'm sorry, I should have expanded on. The sensitivity of the location that we're concerned about here is, number one, that there's wetlands that are right very close to the pump station. We're in the buffer. We're in the 100-foot buffer of those wetlands, and that wetlands is tributary to water supply. So that's the sensitivity right there.
Yeah, it's the entire site's kind of on a sensitivity. I want to bring up a point, and I hope it's been corrected, because your application is stating that you applied for these units, and the application continues to dictate it's on 59 acres. The housing component is on 59 acres and 39 buildable. So your application needs to be modified to the state, showing how many acres the actual residential dwelling is on. Because your application and the response from Mass Housing, they're showing it and they're responding on a residential use on 59 acres with 37 buildable. It's in the application response from Mass Housing. So that's a strategically important issue that I think needs to get reported to Mass Housing, because their approval of this was based on what you submitted. And the submittal, developer intends to build 272 homes on 59 acres, 39 of which are buildable, resulting in a density of 6.9 units per buildable acre. Well, what we calculated is far exceeds that on the 6-point-something acres you're putting the residential structure on. So I'd like to get a commitment that that's going to be corrected at Mass Housing. Or you can clarify it.
Yes, and actually, I'm just reading here so that I don't misspeak. The application for the comprehensive permit that went to Mass Housing in Exhibit D and E of that application lays out the sort of the plan for how the site is going to be developed in phases. So it talks about the fact that the first phase that the
No,
site...
it originally talked about the first phase. Further down, when it says density, the state's responding that the developer intends to build 272 homes on 59 acres, 39.16 of which are buildable. The resulting density is 6.95 acres per buildable acre. Given the housing type and its location within a similar-sized office development, the proposed density is acceptable. So is that language correct? I'm on, this was dated May 24th, updated 5/29. I'll give you my copy if it's highlighted.
Yep.
I know a lot of communications go back and forth and changes and amendments are made, so I just want to try to stay as consistent as possible with any amendments or changes that are reflected in the latest information, that's all.
Yeah, no, understood. It's something that we can clarify with Mass Housing. That's not a problem. There is language in the comprehensive permit application that talks about how the site is going to be developed in phases, how the initial site is 59 acres. That's the site that's remaining today after the restaurant depot has been carved out, and how the plan is to continue to subdivide the site in the future with the addition of the future office buildings. So while the density is that number currently, it's not anticipated to stay at that level. But we can certainly go back and clarify that with Mass Housing.
Okay, great. John, can you come up and give us a quick update, if you would?
Yeah, as it was said, we met with them yesterday, I believe. Yesterday we met with them, and I think they finally realized what we were looking for, and they're agreeing to go with what we want, and we just have to tweak it a little bit and get the final stages, but took a couple meetings to meet and finally get it, so I think they're at the point now that they know what we want, and they're going to give it to us.
Okay, makes sense for everybody?
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions on the sewer? Anybody on the audience care to be heard about the sewer? Mr. Visconti, come on up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With respect to this sewer overflow, I would suggest that the overflow capacity be equal to, at a very minimum, 1 day's flow, which I believe is around 80,000 gallons plus. Further, that overflow should be able to, once the pumps come back online, the overflow tank should be able to design to channel the effluent back into the pump station to be pumped out into the sewer system. Thank you. I'm not sure if you understood what I said or not. I don't know if I was clear.
I have a good idea, and I think Mr. Mainini even has a better one.
I'm sure he does. I'm sure he does.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Any other comments concerning the sewer? Okay, why don't we go to the water? Any of our consultants' reports have not indicated that the applicant has given us any calculations on water. Our consultant provided, Tater and Howard provided some lengthy information, but I'd like to hear from the applicant on where we stand concerning the water issue. I believe it was indicated that there is already a 12-inch line in the street for the new development for Restaurant Depot. Is that correct?
That is correct.
I believe that Tata and Howard report preceded our comprehensive permit. That was based on, I think that was based on the mass housing application. Since then, the comprehensive permit plans did show the water main sizing, hydrant locations to address their concerns and to address the fire department's concerns. So we have addressed some of the site layout issues that they brought up. And then Israel will speak to the capacity issues.
Okay, great.
So we have met with the director of the Milford Water Company, David Condry, who's here in attendance this evening. We reviewed the options put forth in the Tata and Howard study for generating sufficient water capacity to service the project. We had a good discussion about that. I have also been in direct contact with the other proponent for the other 40B application to work together essentially to come up with a plan to pay for the work that needs to be done in order to bring the water capacity online to service our project and theirs. At this point, it's our expectation that we'll be able to arrive at an agreement sort of between the three of us, the water company, ourselves, and the other proponent. Should that change at some point in the future, we're committed to working directly with the water company to achieve that, but as things stand now, that is the plan. And we're confident that given the reports that we've reviewed and some of the options that we've talked about in terms of bringing additional capacity online, that we'll be able to do that in a timeline and in a manner that will work with the timing of our project.
Thank you, Israel. Dave, can you come up and enlighten us a tad? And I'm going to make a comment, whether people like what I say or not. Frankly, it is what it is. You know, I've reviewed this Tater and Howard letter that was dated in January 22nd, and frankly, it's quite disturbing. What wells are in, what basically the comments made of what is necessary going forward in the future, the level of water anticipated going out to 2027, 2034, frankly, 2027 estimated, projections out to 2037. It's a pretty scary report. And I don't know if the water company will concur with any of these comments, but I'd like to hear them, if you would, Dave.
Just to back up what Mr. Israel had stated, that we are now looking at the possibility of doing some work at Dilla Street as well. And one of the reasons we've kind of started shifting towards Dilla Street is, one, it's part of the existing treatment plant system, so that any water that we do get, any kind of redevelopment we get, any kind of production increase in those wells will go through the plant, so no additional plant or treatment is needed. It'll be able to go through the existing plant. So there was a little bit of a timing issue that may be a benefit as far as that's concerned, whereas obviously Godfrey Brook, it's a fairly long, drawn-out process at this point because of, one, we have to complete the treatment process and the pilot study, and then number two, then we have to get into the designing, and then it'll be phase work from there. We'll redevelop the existing wells and get those up and running through the new treatment plant, and then we'll start to look at additional wells within that well field, which when you read the GZA report, it clearly spells out that additional wells will be needed in the well field to get us back to the full capacity. So the first phase of the Dilla Street, obviously, is to take a look at it and see if, is the capacity there for its original permitted value, which is that 6.75 that you see in the Tater and Howard report. That's what we're permitted to pump from there. So that's what we're going to be looking at, or what one of the options that we're going to be looking at with this crew. Another point is that they've also reached out to the other 40B projects, so they have reached out to try to get all three of them involved with coming up with a solution as to possible mitigation for their needs, if you will. To get to your points, That's part of the reason why we provided the layout, if you will, by Tater and Howard to the town when we did our initial responses to the first 40B, the East Main Street 40B. So yes, when you get out to the 2037 and the 2027 numbers on the max day flows, based on what they're projected with the facilities, clearly we're exceeding what those numbers are going to be for, you know, the pumping volumes that we have. And one thing that makes them lower is using that 1.5 MGG out of the Echo Lake and Charles River combined. That's where the numbers kind of drop off. The one
That's
point,
because of the surface, it's surface water.
correct. The one thing to note that the 1.75 is what we call an annual average, meaning that when we look at the 365-day calendar and we calculate total volume pumped out of those two sources, their average volume cannot exceed 1.57 million gallons per day. So they'll take a look at that total volume, they'll divide it by 365 and see what that number is. It doesn't per se mean that in the middle of July, on July 4th, and it's 90 degrees outside, that I can't pump 2.5 million gallons out of the reservoir or 3 million gallons out of the reservoir for that particular day, or even for you know, a week, if you will. What that number represents is an average for 365 days. So just for clarity purposes, that's what that number
But you
represents.
have to use the surface water in order to make some of these numbers work.
Oh yeah, no, there's no doubt. When you look at the numbers, the 1.57 is being used. And what we're trying to do is, by using the 1.57, we feel very confident that if you minimize the volume coming out of Echo Lake at 1.57, that when we get into these serious drought situations like we've had in 2016, that the reservoir can sustain itself. They call it a safe yield number, and the reason for it is they based it off of the 1985 drought of record, and then they calculate how much water was within our reservoir, and they come up with what they call a safe yield. So in theory, if you were to pump 1.57 million every single day out of the reservoir, it should sustain itself and never come to a point where you have these critical issues where you might be in an emergency situation, if you will. But again, that number doesn't mean that, like I said, in July, that I can't pump 3 million gallons out of it, because there'll be times that obviously you have to do that.
What type of contracts do you have to outlining cities and towns that would impact any type of draw?
I'm
If
sorry.
any other towns are you drawing? Are you providing water on an emergency basis to any other towns
We have a couple
under
of
contract?
We have agreements with them, but the way the agreements are written is that we are not mandated to supply them. It's only if we have available capacity. And that's the only time that we'll be able to supply them. And the way they're written is from June 1st to October 1st, it's already been stated that we cannot supply them with emergency water.
We end up in a drought situation. We've got all of these online. We end up in a drought situation, which means other towns end up in a drought and serious situation. What happens? We can't supply the water.
Yeah, well, I mean, 2016, I think, was, you know, for at least most recent time, was a good example.
Right.
You know, we spent the entire year in a stage 4, so we heavily restricted any outside use. One thing that, you know, that helped to impact that drought was the fact that, you know, our capacities had dropped off. So that's why we're working to get those other capacities back. So if we can get these other well fields back, that impact will be less.
So
going forward.
a lack of maintenance or a lack of upgrading has prevented, even now, any developer from coming in trying to grow in the community, expand in the community, whether it's a residential subdivision, a small little cul-de-sac of 5 homes, because we've got a major well, Godfrey Brook is down. We can't provide water even to the smaller ones, never mind the bigger ones.
And just for clarity, it's not so much a lack of maintenance, it's just over time, well fields naturally diminish in capacity. We were constantly annually doing, redevelopment of the existing wells, but over time, they eventually get to a point where you can't bring them back to their full capacity.
Right, so what's the plan going forward? I mean, we're in 2018. In 12 years, we're going to have an issue. And then by 2034, what is the plan for the next 10 years?
Well, again, these numbers can be...
To try and find water, to obtain water, for a treatment facility or a treatment plant? What is the 10-year forecast of the demand for water from the water company's perspective to be able to supply this community without any of this growth?
Right. Going forward, trying to find additional sources in this basin is going to be very difficult for everyone. It's not just Milford, it's Bellingham, everybody, because we're in a stressed basin. So there's been, it's going to be difficult to put new sources online, if you will. It's not to say that we can't try to find some of them, but a lot of those sources that we're going to be trying to put online will have impacts with the communities around us because of the fact that we're all in one basin. So I think going forward, the best thing for us is that we maintain what we have permitted and we do more conservation efforts. There's other efforts that we can do, going forward, like, making sure that all of the low flow fixtures are being used. We do leak detection every year, so we can minimize any of that lost water that is critical to our needs. So there are other items that we will be focusing on going forward. But as far as getting new sources approved, that's highly unlikely at this point, only because, again, the basin we're in is going to be difficult to get a new source approved. Now, the numbers can be adjusted. The Managed Permit Act numbers can be adjusted. We might be able to get that 1.57 adjusted. We might be able to get some capacity added to the existing wells. But, in order to do that, we need to meet all kinds of conservation criteria, if you will. And part of the reason we are not being so much bothered as far as what we're doing with Echo Lake and the Charles River is that, we have shown over the years that we're maximizing our conservation efforts. And the town has done a good job at doing that. And our customers have done a good job at doing that. So,
is there any R&D in progress right now, or any R&D plans to find an aquifer, to improve, or to have a location for a better treatment, an added treatment facility going forward? In the report, it's indicating another treatment facility may be needed. So where are we concerning that future forecast or that future development? We're looking at a report going out 10 and 15 and 20 years, but I don't see any of the R&D that's trying to step in during the next 10 or 20 years, which is, I think, a concern to this board from the water standpoint for the amount of units that are coming through. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, we can permit all of these for the amount of units, and in 2 years, everything expires because you can't get a well, you can't get Godfrey Brook up and running. So right. There's been a used exhaustion of everybody's time and a huge exhaustion of financial funds to get to a point you can't do anything. So I'm trying to find the sense of, okay, the state is being indulged, the entire state of Massachusetts is being overburdened with 40B applications. When I ask a development group, would you cut down or carve down on the units, I don't get an answer. It's just like a no. So we're going to go into these decisions I'm making a recommendation to cut down on some of these units, because we don't even know if we can provide them water. So those are concerns that this board has, I think the community has, and, you know, I don't know, you know, some developers are sensitive to that, some aren't, but it's a concern of mine, it's probably a concern of some of the board members, and I know it's a concern of the community. It's scary to think that there isn't any R&D in the works going for the next 15 years. That concerns me, especially on behalf of this community.
Well, I mean, we do have plans in the work. I mean, GZA was the...
But they're limited, the resources are limited, is what you're saying.
What's limited is the amount of water that we have available within the community.
Right.
Again, that doesn't mean that we can't look, or there isn't a possibility that you look at a potential for other sources, but I think the main thing, our main focus right now is bringing the existing well fields back to their original capacities. That is where we're focusing our efforts, you know, for the next 5 years anyways, five to 6 years.
How long has Godfrey been down? How long has that well field been down?
Just over a year.
Just over, so is there a reason why it went down?
Yeah, we have one that we were doing well redevelopment. Again, the well field over time, it started to fall off. So the development process wasn't bringing them back to where their original capacity was. The next thing that happened was manganese regulations changed within the department, within Massachusetts. So there's a significant amount of manganese in that well field. So now we had to start looking at certain wells within the well field that produced more manganese than others, so we had to back off on the use of those, and so we got limited on how many wells we could actually pump in that. And eventually it got to the point where we needed to shut those off near the end of that 2016 time period, when we started to slowly recover from the drought time. We made a decision to shut those off so that we could start the process of doing a capacity study, which GZA did. And then number two is start the process of how are we going to deal with the manganese issue, which is treating the manganese. So that's where the new treatment facility comes from. So right now we're working on the treatment process, and we've gotten a GZA report. So once the piloting's done, once we get approval or acceptance that this particular treatment process is going to work, then we're going to go out and do a design build and do what needs to be done within the existing plant, because we're pretty confident that and process will be able to go within the existing building, so we don't need a new building. And then number two is to start redeveloping the existing wells, and then start to look at additional wells that are going to be needed to get us back to that original capacity. While we're putting in the additional wells, we're going to put extra wells in so that, you know, because the well field's not going to change as far as maintenance goes. It's still going to be a high maintenance at well field. It's going to need to be redevelopment on an annual basis on certain wells. So we're going to put in more wells so that, you know, if we take 4 offline to do redevelopment, we've got 4 backups so that we can maintain that capacity during that redevelopment. And then our next look was going to be at Dilla Street, and that's, you know, again, that's why we started to look at maybe possibility of Dilla Street for the potential for the 40Bs. But that's our goal. Our goal is to get the existing sources and get those back to their original capacities.
Okay, and one last question, because I hear it from companies, but I'd like to hear it from you. If someone was building a new home today, can they put in underground irrigation?
Underground irrigation.
Can they do irrigation for their lawn?
If they put their own well in.
So they have to spend the money on their own well?
Yep, since 2006, the company...
Is any sensitive areas in this community prohibited from putting a well in?
Not that I am aware of. That usually what defines that is the amount of ledge that's in town.
Right.
There's so much of it. But yes, since 2006, they haven't allowed any irrigation. Every once in a while, we do find that somebody's put one in, but we'll make them disconnect it.
Okay.
If we do come across that.
Okay, great. Hang on, I don't know if someone else has any questions.
Hi, David. You had mentioned about research and development. I think you also mentioned about, I think you said leaking. How's the infrastructure in town here? I mean, is there ways of detecting leaks and how much of that is going on? And what's the infrastructure like? Is it in bad repair? Does it need a lot of repair? And what does that do to all this?
Yeah, no, we have an older system, we all know that. What we have found is that, because we do annual leak detection, so we do the entire water system every year. We hire a firm to come out and they actually do listening devices that they can hear water if it's leaking or, you know, if it's just normal use, that type of thing. So we do that annually. We do the entire system. What we have found is that for the most part, the system itself is pretty tight. The issue we have is that some of the older mains, the amount of flow that goes through them is dropping off because we have some streets that have a lot of this 4-inch cast iron water mains and, you know, hydraulically they're an issue. So that's what we're finding. For the last 3 or 4 years now, that when we do have a leak on a specific type of main or we're doing any work on a specific main, we're cutting out a section of that main and we have it analyzed. They do crush tests and metal thickness tests on them. So we're finding that that's been beneficial to kind of give us an idea of what is left or what that useful life is for that particular water main. We did the same on Purchase Street when we had that big water main break. We ended up cutting a section of that out and getting tested to see, you know, because that's a very large carrying main for us. So obviously, when it split the way it did, we had some concerns of, well, you know, is it going to do it again somewhere else down that run? But the crush test came back fine. So there just must have been some sort of anomaly in that one section that the cast iron itself was weaker.
You mentioned about the flow slow down. Is that because of why does the flow slow down? I might have missed that. I'm sorry.
It's growth. Usually the growth within the mains. Yeah, as they. Yeah, right, exactly. If you want to look at it that way, yes, we call it tuberculation, but the same thing happens. You know, over time, you know, calcium builds up on the inside, iron deposits build up on the inside, so it'll slow down or restrict the flows.
Is there any water loss due to that fact?
Not so much water loss,
but just the
it's
flow.
just water flow. So, you know, you'll open up a hydrant, you know, when that thing was originally put in, you'll get 800, 900 gallons a minute out of it. And, you know, you open it up today and you might get 400 gallons a minute.
Gotcha.
And that's what you realize, and that's what you see.
Dave, as you know, the whole water issue is falling on the shoulders of this board. I mean, it's now, just as an overall statement, is this board playing Russian roulette with the water supply of Milford by approving these? Or do you think that, just give me your opinion, are we playing Russian roulette with the Milford water supply by getting involved with these 40Bs and adding them to to the Milford water system?
I mean, we're also working in the background. We're working on, you know, what's our build out, if you will. Where is that build out number at? And, you know, if you look at the hard numbers as far as if you take a look at what we're permitted to pump on a daily basis and utilize even the 1.57, you know, the total comes out to, on a daily basis, we can do like 3.84 MGD. So that's 3.84. And, you know, we're kind of targeting that number as, you know, that's my max amount of water that we want to be pumping on a daily basis, you know, on an average daily basis. We don't want to really exceed that because that's putting, you know, extra burden on that Echo Lake. Again, that's using the 1.57. So again, as I stated before, we do have some play there where, you know, for a week or so we could go higher than that. But, you know, we're kind of looking at the 3.84. So when you look at these, the 340Bs in total, I think they come out to 3.64, I think it is. So basically at the end of the day, with the addition of these, we've got about 200,000 gallons of play. Again, this these are what we've kind of been working at, and so we're kind of looking at it. And, you know, if we want to look at those numbers, if that's the route we take, then I think we can almost say that, what's the total on these? Total units, not for just this one, for all three of the projects.
60, yeah.
Yeah, so whatever that total number of because they're looking at it as a dwelling, so let's say they're even houses, right? So I think if we start looking at that number, you know, I'm pretty comfortable that I can say that, you know, maybe that's our build out now. You know, if we want to be comfortable, you know, we can add another, what, 300 or 400 units to the system once we're at our full capacities with the wells. Again, again, we need to be there first, and that's part of the reason why when we get asked by these developers, well, you know, right now we're not doing water services until I can get this stuff back up.
All right, the other question, Dave, do you see this as an asset that if the 340Bs come together with you and put the money in that you have requested to bring your system where you believe it should be, will that also help the town of Milford?
If you look at the three, what their required needs are, and then we look at, say, just the Diller Street, yeah, there's going to be excess available to the community. There will be excess. But again, when you look down to 2027 and 2037, again, you're running into that line where, you know, again, we're not feeling so comfortable as far as, you know, what we're going to be able to pump in those, because those numbers also take into consider a certain amount of growth. So, you know, there's additional growth there, but the other side, I have to take a look at it. It's with the DCR. They have some funky number for every community. No, that's where I was going next. So now we also have to take a look at that number and back out of it what we already have out there, what we know are out there already. I know Dominic has another 100 maybe units that he's looking at, and then I know Loberser has a couple. But outside of those two, I think those two are probably the largest. I know there's one other that has maybe 4 units that he's looking up, that just the Labrador Estates. I think it's just 4 units there. So, but that, you know, I don't know what other building lots are out there in Milford. So I think if we take a look at their total numbers of dwellings and work from there, you know, that 384, I think, is a good number for us. Because, again, that'll keep us at the 1.57, which is a very safe number for us if we do that on a daily basis. And usually the way we operate is that, you know, during the winter months, we can back off on the reservoir so it, you know, has a chance to recover, et cetera. So, but again, we are still working on that build-out number, if you will. But you know, just taking what we have before us and we look at those, you know, what our actual capacity is, you know, that average day demand is what we would be comfortable with.
Okay, Dave, just the other question. As you know, what is the sensitivity of these numbers? If we were to take the total units available, I mean, included in the 40B, if we were to reduce one of them and say, you've got to come down to a certain number, does that make sense to you? Would that help?
Of course, because you're going to minimize your demands. Right. So obviously, you know, it's going to be a benefit as far as their demand and lowering that, you know, bottom line impact going forward.
Okay, and if in fact, as you know, we will be subjected to appeals to mass housing, and if you had to go before mass housing because we reduced one and they asked you if you could supply them, what would be your answer?
If you reduce the number?
Yeah, and they appealed it, and they went to mass housing, and you were brought before them as part of the appeal process, mass housing. What would you tell mass housing, that you could supply them?
Well, basically, I'll stick to this.
Okay.
This is what I'm going to stick to. And until we get the, you know, the wells back too, that's where we're at. I mean,
Okay.
that's I'm not doing it to make it sound, to put fear in everybody, but I mean, this is realistically, this is where we're at right now.
Yeah, you're being very good, David. I mean, you're up there, and
You know, and especially after the drought of 16, it really opened my eyes as far as, wow, you know what I mean? Just when you go up to Echo Lake and you start looking around, so.
Yeah, Dave, just a couple of questions. As I've understood you on all of these projects, and as you said tonight, if this board issued the comprehensive permits on one of them or all three of them tonight, as a matter of law, they can't pull building permits until they've got an approved source of water. You could not approve them for a source of water now.
Right now, no.
So, I've heard all you said and reviewed everything. What is, based upon your dealings with the companies, what is the realistic point where you could be at that point where you can say, okay, we can now approve a source of water for all three of these?
Realistically, again, we already got the GZA report back. GZA came back, it's got a favorable report. The issue I've got with GZA is that until you get those additional wells in the ground, I don't know that. Do you know what I mean?
No, I understand,
I can probably bank on the redeveloped portion of it, which was like 275 gallons a minute or so, but I need additional wells. So anytime they start talking about additional wells in a well field, there's no guarantee of what I'm going to get out of that. So I'm less, comfortable with Godfrey Brook. If we can get this Dilla Street back, which, I'm more comfortable with the possibility of Dilla Street providing its original capacity, because the well field history has always been there. It's just that the wells, where they were put and kind of how they were designed the last time, they weren't as efficient as they should have been or could have been. So, I'm thinking that would be fine. If we got a report back on Dilla Street, and it says that, the test wells prove out that we should be able to get that 675, and we can get an idea of when we can get those wells in, I might be okay with it at that point. Because again, we're adding
But is that
675.
point 1 year, 2 years, 3 years? What realistically, knowing the
I
process
mean,
you have to
realistically,
go through?
even the Dilla Streets are probably a 2-year project by the time we're done.
Godfrey Brook would be longer than that?
Definitely. Because again, within a couple of years, I want to have that treatment plant and utilizing the existing wells. So I want to get those into the system. But that's only 275 gallons a minute. So now the real process is putting the other wells in, and then there's pump tests that are involved with those, and picking the proper sites. And then again, it's that gamble that particular well you put in is going to produce what you want. So that process is definitely a lot longer.
Hi, David.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to keep this really simple. So we had this conversation about a month or so ago. Basically, right now, our water level's here.
Right now.
Right now. For everybody to need the water they need, we need to be here.
Right.
In order to get there, we need to do all this infrastructure.
At the well fields,
improvement.
correct, yeah.
Okay, once we get here and everybody's up here, and we run into a problem with drought, et cetera, or infrastructure issues, and we end up back down here, what happens?
Again, those are the type of things that it's like a cycle. So then you have to go and redevelop wells and possibly look for additional.
Okay, redeveloping wells.
Yep.
Let's go on that subject real quick. What if you can't redevelop wells?
Again,
What if there's no more?
Eventually, you will get to the point where, the well fields don't produce.
Because your report's only projected at 19 years from now.
Right.
That's
right.
and it's
Right.
over.
Yep.
Is your report also inclusive of all the new businesses coming into town?
No, right now, this is just looking at these 3 projects plus anything that we know
you're
about
aware of.
right now. Yep.
Not counting the new businesses.
Nope.
So we don't know what's going to happen within the next 19 years if we're going to have to start telling our residents they can only take 2 showers a week.
We'll definitely be in some kind of water restrictions. That's a guarantee going forward from this day forward
Well,
that
there's
at
no-
some point there's going to be restrictions.
And correct me if I'm wrong, just by listening to the comments and the questions, these well fields that we currently have eventually dry up, and you need to look further.
There is no, you can keep your eye on how much the capacity is. You can monitor the well field capacity, but it's a crystal ball. It's not something you can see way out into the future.
No, I agree.
It doesn't,
I understand.
You're right. There could be a point.
I'm just looking at.
The
as
same
a
with
re-
Echo Lake. I mean, Echo Lake is recharged by rain, and
Yeah.
again, we saw that.
Well, if we can guarantee X amount of rain, we can guarantee pretty much anything.
Right.
But the bottom line is, my concern is what's going to happen down the road 19 years from now, 20 years from now, 5 years from now. If we run into, instead of a 2-year drought, what about a 3-year drought? What about a 4-year drought? We're not, California's got issues.
Yep.
We can run into the same issues. Just because we're here doesn't mean we can't have them.
Right.
The question is, what do we do?
And again, that's where this whole restriction and we minimize the water usage like we had. In 2016 we did that.
I understand that.
And that's how we addressed it.
I understand if we do this, we can get that. But what if we do this and it doesn't work? History's loaded with that.
Yeah.
Best laid plans. And I'm looking at the future.
Yeah. It's I mean,
Do
I
we-
can't even begin to tell you that I can predict what would happen. The only thing we would be able to do, and the only thing we would do, is obviously we would react before we got to that critical stage and
No, I-
minimize. And
I'm sure you would.
We never got to the point, but we were close in 2016 to start going to commercial high users and cutting them and backing them off on their usage.
I know I'm asking questions that really can't be answered because you can't predict the future.
Right.
I understand the part where you're going to put 4 new wells in as a backup in case you got to work on the other 4, et
Yep.
cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I know how that works. Again, we need to be here. Currently, we're here. Once we get here, and if we need to, can we get there? And it doesn't sound like we can. It sounds like we're going to be here maxed out.
And that's the other thing we're working on is that we need to give the planning board a build-out number. What number we feel is where, with what we have available to us right now.
Which should also include the future businesses that are going in their locations alone.
Right.
That's all got to be accounted for. That's a lot of water.
Yeah, because we don't know. One of the bigger things is businesses turning over, except like RDOT, we have no idea what's going in there.
Milford's expanding, and there's
Yeah.
a lot of businesses going in. Like I said, Alfonso's got things going in.
Yeah.
Lobos has got things going all over the place. And there's a lot of renovations going on, which are using more water. There's places that aren't currently being used that will be used shortly. These all
Yeah,
have to be
we
accounted
have
for.
started to look at the businesses though too. So when the drought hit, we also started looking at businesses that were coming in. Anytime we got a site plan review, we started looking at the businesses as well, as far as requesting what's your usage going to be, what's your demand going to be, because we started looking at those as well. Quite frankly, we wouldn't have agreed to their office depot or restaurant depot, if you will, except for the fact that they got a couple of bathrooms going in there, and their water demand on that one building was very minimal. So, so we accepted that. But we're doing that as well with commercial users as well.
Well, I just want
And we're going to be looking at the power plant when they start to do their renovations. We're going to look back at, we have an agreement with them that, when we're in a stage 4 restriction that we can turn them off. And we also have an agreement that they can only take up to 350,000 a day. Some of our concerns we have with the renovations that they're planning on, it's being done to make them more compatible in the competitive in the market. So they might be running, more. So where we used to feed them maybe a dozen times a year, they might be looking for 3 or 4 months out of the year that they're going to be pulling water from us. So we already told them that we're going to have to take a look at that again, because that's going to raise another issue.
Well, these are all things that, again, if you're here, we need to be here. Can we get there?
Yep.
Probably not.
Yep.
This is our max. in an emergency situation, where do we go?
And
That's
we
what
are,
the residents of this town want to know.
in some of our future planning, we are going to look at potential other sources, but right now, the company's main financial commitment is to redeveloping what we have and getting those back up. And then after that's done, you know, like I said, that's not to say that we won't try to see if we can't find another location that might potentially be an additional source of water. Yep.
Hi, Dave. Now, David, I think I remember you saying at the last time you were before us that, and you repeated it tonight also, that we live in a drought basin,
A stress basin, yes.
a stress basin. And did you say that when we put our restrictions on in town, that those are state mandated?
The particular levels that, you know, I might make a different level of requirement, but we are required by our Management Act permit, the same permit that gives us the numbers that you see on this sheet, to have some sort of restriction starting May 1st. So before May 1st, we went into the stage 1, if you will. So we're on a voluntary water restriction, and we've modified that so that those with the grandfathered irrigation systems can use them on an odd even basis. So yes, every May in May 1st, I need to have some sort of restriction in place. It doesn't say I need to be on a stage 4, it doesn't say at 3, but I need at a minimum have some sort of restriction. And so again, we went into the stage 1 before that.
Now, obviously, when we talk about restrictions and conservation, we're basically talking about those things being done by the residents or the homeowners of Milford. It seems to me when we talk about providing water, we talk about providing water for these developments. We really don't talk at all about providing water for the residents of Milford. Oh, we have enough if we do this development, well, then we can provide the water for the 40Bs. You know, I look at the restrictions that are placed on people in town, the homeowners, and I don't know in good conscience if I can sit here and say, well, these levels of restrictions will be placed on homeowners, yet the people in these developments have zero restrictions. They can drink all the water they want, they can take all the showers they want, and there's really no burden on them whatsoever. So I look at the Milford residents, and I'll take myself off this board for a second and say in 2016, when we had the bad drought, I lost my lawn. Obviously, the following year, I had to pay to put a new lawn in because of these water restrictions. So the feedback that I have gotten from people is, well, it's summertime, here come the restrictions again, here goes the lawns, there goes the gardens, yet these people will never be burdened. You're really talking about homeowners, and when you talk about conservation, you're talking about the people that own homes to do all of the conservation that is necessary. Is that right, or am I assuming too much?
No, I mean, basically, yes. If you live in one of these type apartment buildings, is basically what it would be. There obviously they would be under the same restrictions, but most of the restrictions apply to non-essential outdoor use. So if you're living in that, inside that community, you know, yes, you can take as many showers. But just in point 2 is that the residents of Milford could do the same. They could take as many showers as they want inside. I mean, just when you start looking at it in that aspect. But yes, when we start talking restrictions, it's outside non-essential use. So obviously, people that live in those type of developments, you know, other than whether or not, in most places, I don't think they have a place where people can go out and actually wash their car, you know, with a garden hose. I don't know of any, but I don't know that for sure. But that would be where the restrictions lie. That's where those restrictions lie. It's not so much internal use as we are in an external use when we talk about restrictions.
Now, let me ask you, when you heard about all of these 40Bs coming in, was your head spinning? Were you saying to yourself, oh my God, how can we do this? How can we provide water? The people in this town will go crazy.
No, and even before the 40B came on, we had some concerns when we got, the Bear Hill, and there was a couple of others that, we started having concerns because at that time we were struggling with Godfrey Brook, and we knew that Dilla Street was something we were going to have to look at as well. So yeah, we've had concerns, and when we get the site plan reviews, we've been stressing our concerns about them for, quite some time. And then, then the first 40B came in, and, once we looked at it and we did the initial study, quite frankly, all we did was add a couple of more numbers to the study. The study did not change. The verbiage inside our initial study didn't change. It's just we added a new name to it and another number to that, increasing the amount of flow, so.
Thanks,
yeah,
Dave.
it's a big thing to take on, and to be honest with you, it's my concern is that I'm the bad guy here, which hey, I don't to be honest with you, it is what it is. If I sound like I'm the bad guy, and again, I'm not trying to scare anybody or anything like that, but the true fact is right here. And even with all of the sources online, that doesn't mean that, we run into a drought situation, that we're right back to, even with what you have now, with the amount of customers we have right now, it doesn't mean that down the road we have the same issue. It's inevitable that at some point it's going to happen. It's, it's cyclical.
And John brings up a good point, and I think as you can see, this board's been inundated with the 40B process for quite a few months now, and don't think that we're frustrated. We're just trying to get the proper answers for the community and for themselves to make the proper decision. I have a couple more quick questions for you, maybe related, maybe not. When you go into a new project as part of the water permit, do you require conservation initiatives for that project?
The main thing we do require is, no irrigations be tied into the system. As far as the low flow concept, I've always been under the impression, or I've always understood that that's part of plumbing code now, that it's a requirement on a lot of the fixtures.
Okay, but you can add additional conditions to that if you so choose to conserve additional water, whether it be the toilets reducing from whatever they are now, 1.5 gallon to 1.2.
Yeah.
So that was one question. The other question I had for you had to do with wells. I tried to open up a dialogue concerning the last applicant, concerning the water company having access to their site to see if there's an opportunity for additional water. Apparently you didn't take us up on that offering, whether you felt it wasn't worth trying to proceed down that road, since the site is a challenging site as well. Is there any merit to trying to investigate any of those areas, or in particular this one as well, for future avenues of water?
Again, for the water company, we're focusing on the existing wells and trying to get those back up. Now, down the road might be, it's a possibility that we'll look for additional well fields, but the amount of time and extreme amount of money that would be needed to do a new source development would take away from me getting my existing wells back to where they need to be.
And that's the question I wanted to ask you. If you had the opportunity, is it an expensive proposition, for instance, to go on Route 16 to the other Brookview Robsham site and actually get permission to do some testing on that site to see if there was maybe an aquifer, maybe not, but is it worth it? And if it isn't, is it because it's cost prohibitive?
The main thing is it's the cost prohibitive. It's cost prohibitive, plus it's the process now to get a new source online is years. It's not, 1 year, it's not 2 years. It's a drawn, long
So,
process. And lots
and that's
of
why I
money.
asked you, is there a future R&D in the future of the water company to looking for additional sites, especially if it's going to take years I try to identify a location?
At this point, no. We are, again, focusing on what we have. That's where our biggest bang for our buck is going to go right
Okay.
now.
Well, then you answered the question. I have one last question. Since you're Cape Cod born and bred, I assume,
Yes.
you're familiar with developments down on the Cape. Are most of those developments utilizing drilling wells for their sites
For
for water?
most of them, no. If there's town water, most of them are required to put in town water. So
Have you had experience with others doing well?
doing wells,
Yeah.
no.
Okay. I didn't know if
None of the communities that I did. I'll tell you who does do it a lot is down on the Lower Cape, like the Eastham, those type of areas, Truro. Those type of communities do because the infrastructure just wasn't there.
Right. Okay.
And they do them, and they
Smaller communities do them as well.
total different
Animal.
sand and
Yeah.
everything down is different.
We could use some sewer gravel up here.
Yeah, you got it. I mean, and just to throw it out there, there's always the MWRA. It's something that we looked at several years ago. It was something that at the time was not an option. But if we got to a point that we get the wells redeveloped and we're back and we're doing okay, there's always the potential to try to get into that system. It's a long process. It does have a significant cost involved with it, but it's not on the same lines as trying to get a new source approved. So that is also somewhat of an option, maybe.
Dave, one more question.
Sure.
This has been asked. I've heard other people talking about it. There's no doubt we're in a stressed aquifer.
Yep.
And that includes Bellingham, Hopedale.
Everybody.
Has anybody ever thought of getting us tied into the Quabbin Reservoir through Ashland to pull the water from there?
That's the MWRA. So that we did look at that several years ago.
Okay.
There is some gray areas because we are a private water utility. There was a little bit of gray area that the Boston Water and Sewer people, the MWRA, they would have to make some charter changes, some changes in their statutes to allow them to get it to Milford as the private company. The other issue is that obviously is getting that pipe from there to here. But approaching the other communities, if there was a possibility of sharing that cost, they might be open to it depending on what that benefit is and what their share of that cost is going to be.
That would be the ultimate strategic plan because they never...
As an emergency source, yes.
Right, because they go through Ashland, correct?
Correct.
So
that's the closest community.
Yeah, so you'd have to go Ashland, Holliston, then into Milford, Bellingham, and so forth.
Right.
So that would be, if talking like Dave said, I think he's got a point. If you were get all these towns together and do a strategic plan, maybe that could happen as an emergency resource.
Yeah. I know they've looked at it in the past, but all of them start running away when they realize the cost to get on board.
It would have to be done probably at a state level to try to
Yeah,
deal
that's
with
where it has to start. It would have to start with them, and again, it's mainly because of some of their regulatory restrictions that they have.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, and then the last comment or question I may have, I want to shoot it over to the sewer department, John Mainini. Since these additional units are added, how's the future look for the sewer treatment plant and handling all of this? You're in good shape? So you have no issues concerning handling it. Your infrastructure's pretty solid. Okay, great. Any other board members have any comments or questions? Anybody in the audience have something that they would like to add? Israel, is there anything on your end that you'd like to add, comment on?
So, first of all, I just want to say I completely appreciate the concern about the water. I understand that it's a concern and that it's your responsibility to be a good steward for the town about that. We've been in Milford now for almost, 20 years. I don't know the exact number. I think we've paid about $1 million in taxes on that land over that time. We think what we're trying to do is be part of the solution. We're not, and I'm not, trying to sell you the Kool-Aid or drinking the Kool-Aid, but we're trying to be part of the solution to improve the town's economic base. We have what we think is a site that obviously has not been attractive for office development, which was our main goal. We've worked with the town successfully to bring in Restaurant Depot. I think they'll probably bring in, $250,000 in tax revenue with a very light impact. We believe that this project will help generate some more corporate office activity. Maybe it's another use, maybe it's not exactly office use, but something there. And we believe that because we've seen it happen in other locations. And you don't need to take my word for it. You can just look up and down 128. That's what's going on. With respect to the water, what we're looking to do is we're looking to contribute the funds that are necessary to bring, assuming that it's the Dilla Street location that we were just talking about, 675,000 gallons of capacity from that well. Our project, based on the Tata Howard report, will take 29,000 gallons. So 29,000 gallons is what we're drawing, and we're generating 675,000 gallons of capacity. So if people are going to move to Milford no matter what, whether it's a single family or with apartments, obviously you can't place that burden on a single family homeowner that's moving to Milford. So we think we're providing a source of funds to help with that problem. It will inure, we think, to our benefit to have that project there, because we think that'll help draw the kinds of tenants that hopefully we can be back in front of the board with something, whether it's the ZBA or the planning board, with a project for something that will be a little bit more desirable from the town's perspective. But I just wanted to kind of take a step back and make those comments about it. We've got a vested interest in the town, and these projects are more efficient because we do put in low flow units. The impact that they have is lesser than if you were to take the same number of people and spread it out over the same number of homes. So with that, there were a couple of follow-up items from our last agenda that I'm happy to tick through if you want to.
Please do.
Would like
That'd
me
be
to do
great.
so. Okay. And in no particular order, we don't have it, we didn't plan to present it tonight, but we have revised or working on finalizing a revised plan to meet the 2.0 parking ratio as requested. I have a meeting with Lynn Marcone from the school district to talk about the bus drop-off and pickup area. And at the next hearing, I'll be able to report back on that meeting. We'll also have a whole series of responses that Sims Mania is putting together with respect to the CEI letter that we've got that talked about stormwater and all of those issues, the wetland delineation. All of that is being worked on, and we'll have an update. What we'd like to do is perhaps set up another work session between this meeting and the next one to kind of go through all of those site-related issues that were raised by CEI.
Okay, I was just going to bring up one briefly, and that was that your traffic issue concerning the site is fine. However, it needs to be adjusted because you're going to a residential application a bit. So I think BSC had asked for a crash analysis. I don't know if they're anticipating something in the future, but also the reversal of the traffic flow from the residential part of it, because you're going to be leaving the site in the morning, not entering the site in the morning, so your ramps are going to have some different variations. They asked to check that. I would just follow the comments concerning some of the traffic issues. There was a crash analysis. There was during morning peak hours, motor vehicles would be leaving the site right now, and it's looking like Home Depot, 146 trips compared to 31 trips under the office development side of things. So if we could just get some updating concerning that, that would be helpful.
Okay.
So as long, you've got the comments from CEI, so that is there. The only other comment from the beacon aspect or the signage aspects for the trails, it's indicated in your report that you're going to provide the signing, the samples of those signage within the plan. However, there should be a future phase, so when the balance of the offices get built, that there's signage there before they actually get to the residential development side of it. There should be signage, on the future side of the development. When someone, at the end of the road, for instance, if someone comes out, there should be some type of markings that there's pedestrian traffic, bicycle traffic. And I wanted to thank you, for the cooperation during the work session concerning some of the serious stuff that we felt and some of the board members felt concerning the site itself. I'm not convinced that we don't have one building strictly in a completed wetland, but that review will help determine, what's going on with that particular situation. So I appreciate Israel, taking the time to address some of the things that are on the consultants list so we can move this forward. Okay, anything else we need to handle? Any other board members have any comments, questions?
We got the next hearing on this is the 20th. Right. So if you want to do a work session, we ought to probably set that now. And I think there's really, maybe I'm looking at the 18th, perhaps the afternoon of the 18th. Can that work for you?
What time?
What's good? What's good for you?
Am I golfing?
I don't know. Are you golfing?
No, I can't golf.
Can't golf. Yeah, I don't think you're golfing.
1 o'clock, 2 o'clock,
Yeah,
after lunch?
Is that possible? Perfect. 1 o'clock on the 18th? Yep.
Okay, great.
You need to get a motion to continue this
Yeah,
till 7 o'clock
get one.
on the 20th, same location.
All right, is there a motion to continue for the 20th at 7 p.m.? Motion by Mark, then a second by Charlie. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? That's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. John, you have a question?
Well, you're going to hopefully have met with them.
You're going to hopefully have met with them.
Give the board a letter saying this is what you want and this is what you're going to get, so it'll be spelled out, correct? Before the 20th, yeah.
Before the 20th.
We're going to meet with them and work that out.
If you need to come into the 18th work session, yes. Okay, so he'll be ready for the 18th as well, you think? You'll be ready for the 18th with that? Yes. Okay, great, super. All right, everyone, thank you so much. Have a good night, and we'll continue the discussions.